So first of all, welcome everyone to the February 21 edition of the Nonprofit Connection. I mean, one of the things that we've seen out there is that nonprofits tend to lag behind the for-profit sector in terms of technology and technology spending. And one of the things that I think has come from this whole pandemic and people working from home is there's been a lot more investment in technology overall. And we're seeing that the nonprofit sector is starting to close that gap between what they've traditionally done and what the for-profit sector has done. So I think that's a tremendous positive. And to talk about some of that, we've asked Michael Halperin to join us. Michael is with Solarus Technology. He's big up in the company, and he's totally ready to talk to us a little bit about what's happening in the nonprofit sector and what nonprofits are doing to in this whole new world of technology. So thanks, Mike, for joining us.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
All right. So before we get started, why don't you talk a little bit about how you and Solarus kind of work in the nonprofit sector?
I guess the best way to put this was how I met Matthew, the president and founder. We met on the Habitat for Humanity board probably 3 or 4 years ago. And it just shows that his commitment to nonprofits working already there. We met on the board, we started talking, and then synergy was met, and we started from there. So if you look at what we do, it was already in the fiber before I even came on, and that was a big part of what I wanted to do. So it made it easy for me to jump on board.
Awesome. So again, as I said, the nonprofit sector, I think we're seeing more and more by way of technology kind of coming into the nonprofit sector, but I think there's still issues that exist out there. And I think that's not just for the nonprofit sector, it's for the for-profit sector too. But I guess what are you currently seeing as some of the key issues that the nonprofit sector is grappling with from a technology perspective?
It's not different for the nonprofit than it would be for-profit. Being nimble, being able to have your staff, either work remotely. Sometimes you can't because of social, you're working in homes and group homes and things of that nature, but it's being nimble. It's making sure your stuff is protected. What the solution was 2 years ago or even a year ago may not be your solution today. It's something that you really have to revisit. That's the takeaway. But to me, it really has to do with the nimbleness of your staff being able to pick up and work from wherever and to serve their mission that they have.
Yeah, you mentioned something about nimbleness, but you also mentioned something about cost.
Yep.
So I guess one of the things that we find is that the nonprofit sector has limited budgets. And I guess, what are you seeing the nonprofit sector doing in terms of kind of trying to balance the need in technology with the increased cost and maybe, the budgets and stuff? Are you seeing any changes or what?
Well, I can tell you what they should be doing, and it really goes from the smallest of nonprofits to the largest. They have to start revisiting their budget and what they're paying for with their vendors and their suppliers and whatever they're doing with their IT. The way I would look at it is this: if you haven't looked at your IT services, whether it be your copiers, your internet, your computers, your fire, all of that good stuff.
Well, telephone too.
Yeah, everything. Anything touching connected to your IT. If you haven't looked at those bills and talked to your providers in 3 years, you should. You should always redo it. The worst case scenario, you're probably going to get better service for the same price. Best case scenario, you're saving money, right? Like technology is constantly growing and getting faster, stronger, better. So if you haven't looked at your bills in 4 or 5 years, you're probably paying for something that's obsolete, or you're paying more for a lesser of a service. You've got to start looking at that. And truthfully, anybody who's on this call or views this later, if you want us to review your bills, I would. That's something that it's just to go through to make sure you're not paying for something that's a little bit dated. So now you can get a better service or pay a little less. Either way, I think you're winning.
Sorry. You also talked about, that, and obviously I think every company has experienced some level of migration or pivot to a work at home type environment.
Right.
And one of the things that we're seeing now also is that organizations are trying to assess physical space.
Yep.
And whether that physical space is even necessary on a go-forward basis. Yep. And whether it makes more sense to invest more in technology or invest in the footprint or the physical space that they've traditionally had. So that's also a kind of another thing that I think we're seeing in the nonprofit sector in terms of a trend. And I think, again, I think we're seeing it in all businesses as a trend where businesses are really just kind of grappling with that decision. Where do I invest my money? Where's my money going to be better invested, whether it be, like I said, in physical space or in technology? But with all these people now working from home, what additional risks does that bring up with, people now working at home as opposed to being in an office environment?
Well, there's two ways to look at this. They're working from home. Maybe they're more productive. Maybe they're not. What does your group look like? What are you serving? If it's a group home, you really can't. But the people that are going back and forth, you have to start looking at patterns and how to work with these people and being compliant and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to, but also they're being taken care of for when they're going beyond the extra mile there. There's something called Active Track. I think I mentioned to you when we first started talking about this. And it's something you can put on the systems either stealthily or put on with everybody knowing. I would always say, let your staff know you're doing this. And it can tell you exactly what your team is doing. And I know it sounds big brotherish and it sounds, like, oh, I could watch, but you don't have that day-to-day interaction anymore where you can walk into somebody's office. They're working from home. But if I would have flipped this and the nonprofit world, they're do-gooders, right? We're not here to try to get anybody in trouble or figure something out. I would look at this as a cost savings in a way because it's not expensive, but I can see if you're not using a certain app, right? If you're paying a certain amount of money for an application and all of a sudden now you see that this team is not signing on to it, I could break down the team as well to allow a certain team to use certain parts of your infrastructure and so on and so forth. For instance, your marketing team, them being on Facebook, they're promoting the gala, the breakfast, whatever that they're doing, they should be there. Should your accounting team be there? Should your social workers be there? Probably not. So you can segregate that as well. But at the end of the day, you can talk to people and, you know better than anybody about compliance, right? Like being compliant. Mm-hmm. So if somebody signs on every day at 9:00 in the morning and you see they don't do anything until 9:30, you see them jumping on at 9 and then 9:30 is the first time they're in where they're supposed to be working. You may want to sit down with that person and say to them, hey, if I started your time at 9:30, because it's not affecting your day-to-day business, but if you started them at 9:30 and you let them work to 5:30, does that help that person? Does that help your mission? Is that person forever grateful to them because they're able to put their kids on the bus? So you're able to adjust things where people aren't working extra hours or putting extra time on. And we all know about being compliant. It's an hourly wage, you guys sign on. You can tell them, listen, I see you're working at night. Don't, right? We need you to take your downtime. We want to make sure these people stay fresh. We want to make sure that these people stay true to the mission. If this was, 12 months ago, they leave at 5:00 and they go home. Now they are home working. So this gives you a real good opportunity to go ahead and see what they're doing and almost reward them for being productive. You can make competitions. You can do things of that nature. And that's kind of what's happening out there. And it's not expensive, but it gives you a real understanding. And then here's the part that I think that will follow up afterwards. You start bringing your team back to the office, right? Mm-hmm. You see patterns. You can see how productive they are in the office versus how productive they are at home. Is there something different happening in the office? Is there more accounting work being done there and less of this work? And you can start adjusting your team accordingly. And again, getting into bonuses and who's doing what. I mean, to me, it's almost paramount that a lot of companies start looking at this technology.
So basically what it does is it allows you to almost benchmark what your staff are doing so that you can gain a better understanding of what your staff should be doing based upon their job description or what you have in place for them to do. And then you can have a discussion and make modifications. Maybe some people work more effectively from home. Other people might work more effectively from the office, and you can then decide what your needs are going to be.
Right, and it gives you understanding, even if you start adding people to the team. I mean, it goes even deeper than just that. If you have a team of 5 and you add a 6th person in and productivity falls from 4 of these people, what changed? You can see what you're adding to the elements here. It really gives you a great oversight because you can see not that just they're in that application, not just in your QuickBooks, but they're actually working in QuickBooks. They didn't just open it up and walk away from it, right? I could videotape an entire day if I wanted to and get it back to them and show the person's entire day if that's so what they needed. I don't think we're ever getting to that point. But I can tell you down to the minute what they're doing and what's happening. And I think the better part is cost savings. Like for instance, we all have the higher end, let's say LinkedIn service. And if your team is using that to connect with donors and so on and so forth, and that's an extra $50 a month for 4 or 5 people. and you don't need that service, and it's not something they're ever using. You could literally tell them that you guys haven't signed on this in 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks now, and then allocate those funds either somewhere else, or it's a savings to the organization.
Okay. And you said that was called Active Track?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So something people should look into.
Yeah.
What about, again, with people working more from home, what issues do you see with respect to things like cybersecurity and some of those other things that we hear so much and get scared about?
So it obviously it's changed the entire game, and I'm going to talk a little bit about you're not a target. They're wiggling doorknobs is the way I was put to me. They're not, you could say I'm a really small nonprofit. I'm tiny. I don't really have anything here. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't apply to me. Nobody's looking to get after me. I'm not Kmart or whatever, but they're wiggling doorknobs. And if your door opens up, they're in. And I'm going to tell, a story about how this could affect in a big way. Let's just play along for instance, and I'm gonna give you a story that I was told multiple times, and it was something that they were targeting when this all first started with COVID. You can get into a person's system, right? You're not sending a virus, and you're reading things, you're paying attention to things. We've all been spoofed with the executives asking you to go ahead and do this, and we've all seen those types of things where go buy the credit cards and send them over and all that nonsense. But it's evolving. It's getting bigger and faster and stronger. So they're reading emails, they're paying attention. Now all of a sudden they could read all the emails and they could see who your big donors are, right? They see your big donors. Like, you're not thinking of it as, I've got 4 employees, what am I? Well, just start thinking about your donors for a second, what their worth is. So they read and they call your donor on a telephone. Now we're off the computer. So that being protected, that you think you're protected is your guard's down. Somebody calls you, it's a different story now. Things change. So you get the phone call and I say, hey, Mr. Jones, thank you last year for giving us the $10,000 at the gala. I see you and your wife are coming to the breakfast this year. Again, I appreciate your support. You mentioned something that you saw in the emails about their kid or whatever it is that you see. And then you say to them something along these lines. We're doing our taxes. Unfortunately, we lost or something happened with your credit card number or your tax ID number or whatever that they need. Now they're getting that information via phone. And people put their guard down when it's a phone call. How hard is it going to be to tell your donors that you were breached, right? And your largest donor now you gotta go back to them for money again and ask them to, nonprofits have the ability to keep the same group over and over and over again. You can see the age of a nonprofit sometimes by what their donors look like, how long they've been around. We laugh at like trying to get new blood in there. Can you imagine if you had to go and call all of your donors and say, hey, we were breached and our largest donor or the largest donor gets furious? How are you calling back and saying, could you please write a check again this year? It's not going to be easy. And that's just a small way that if you look at this, the smaller companies have to look at this. So now what's the solution, right? That, the question was, are you seeing this? Yes, that's the worst case scenario right there. But how do you avoid that? To me, the cloud is a big solution to this. 2-point authentication. With the cloud, you're not doing any processing on your system. It's up in the cloud. And if all of my clients and all of your clients put their money together and tried to buy protection, they wouldn't get the protection they have by going into Microsoft's cloud. So that's the level of protection you're getting. Okay, so the cloud gives you the ability to be nimble. So that's what we talked about in the beginning. So if you go back to that point, you now have the protection and you're able to work from different places, and it's also the most secure. So to me, that's a big solution that a lot of companies are looking at. And it's coming down in price, and Microsoft is dumping a boatload of money into it because they know this is the wave of the future. They know this is the way that we're going. So to me, that's a big move here.
And I guess when you're looking at, cloud storage and all that, things get updated on a more regular basis.
All your patches are done. All that stuff is taken care of. And truthfully, you're an island. You're not infecting the rest of your team. You're an island, and you're really watching a video when you do your work. All the stuff that you're working on is somewhere else. So much so that you could probably work on something called a thin client. What that is, it's like a keyboard and a computer, but there's no processing being done inside of it. So all the processing in the cloud. So if you have internet service, you could work. So if your building has a flood, you show them for COVID, there's a problem inside, you could literally work from anywhere. and have that continuity. And the two-point authentication side of this makes it very, very secure. So the whole idea of working from home and having your kids use it for Google Classroom, and you're booking a trip, and you're looking up the COVID stats and whatever it is that you're doing, you're good. Like, you're working on your mission. Like you're getting back to what you should get back to. And I think that's important.
Yeah, so you brought up, all the different things that you're doing on a personal machine. I mean, I think that's one of the risks that you have right now if you're not cloud-based, is you've got people who are working at home on personal machines that maybe haven't been updated with the, most recent patches or most recent protection software and everything else. And again, that's something that a lot of people don't think about. They just think, oh, yes, so-and-so is working from home using their machine. We're saving the money on the technology of not having to provide them with a machine, but they could be opening themselves to exposure, and the cloud is going to kind of help stop that.
And if you know this, who else knows this? The bad guys, right?
Yeah, because I don't really know much of anything. So this is,
yeah. So if you know this, if you know that they're at home and they're doing things that they probably shouldn't be doing on their work computer, or they're doing things on their home computer and working from work, so does a guy, sort of the group that's trying to get into your data, right? So they know what to send out there. I mean, in the beginning of this, they were sending out COVID maps. So you'd click on it. And then that was something where they were using that. I mean, they're ahead of the curve. So how do you protect yourself from that? Cybersecurity, patches, making sure you're up to date, being diligent.
Part of it's also education. It's educating your staff, make sure your staff understand, setting up processes and setting up policies so that your staff, fully understand and comprehend.
Right. And then going back to active track, you're seeing them if they're going somewhere they shouldn't be going as well. Right. Like if you have active track, you're paying attention and you're looking and you're seeing, or you block certain things, right? You could go ahead and make sure they're not going to those places on your, company computer. So that, it's multi-layered. It's not just as simple as just, I have a VPN line and I'm good, right? The VPN is nothing more than a trench from one spot to another that you want to make. You're saying both sides are clean. It's much better than not having a VPN, but cloud is way superior to a VPN situation.
How does cloud compare from a cost perspective in terms of, cloud-based versus having your own file server and stuff like that?
I'm glad you asked that. It's per person, it's typically more expensive. However, those thin clouds that I spoke about are way cheaper than getting computers, right? Being nimble, if you have your back of the house is set up for, let's say, 25 people, and you drop down to 12, 15, whatever it may be during COVID, you're paying for that extra, for the extra 10, 12 people in your IT. When you're in the cloud, you're just going to pay for the amount of people you're using. And it's a click of a button to add 1, 2, 3 people. Now you get back to 25 and your servers and all that stuff can't handle growing. So now you need to invest in more back of the house equipment. And that stuff becomes dated. And that stuff, it expires after 2 or 3 years, and your expiration and your patches and the warranty outruns. So now you're paying for stuff in the back of the house. With the cloud, per person, yes, is more per person. But for the long run, you're able to be not just nimble, work from anywhere, but your numbers can change at a click of a button. I could set up a person in the marketing because, our team, I love my team, and I know we're not just going to show, but I love my engineers behind me, because they set up things like that where very quickly I know if I have to add somebody or remove somebody, if it's cloud-based, it's that much easier, right? It's all of that stuff lives in one spot. Like all that stuff, there's patches, what software they're using, is it Salesforce, is it Blackboard? All that stuff is very quickly put into place.
Got it. One of the other things that, again, we've been talking about costs and stuff like that, but I guess, we're seeing that a lot of organizations, they have technology, they may not be kind of inventorying or benchmarking what they have from a equipment perspective, from a software perspective, from a spending perspective. I mean, what should organizations be spending on technology? What are the key things that they should be focusing on in terms of where to make those spends? And how do they really determine what's kind of appropriate based on the size of their organization or what?
The size, I mean, it's you can go to McDonald's, you can go to the highest end steakhouse, and you're still eating, right? So it's hard to say without knowing the organization what they should be spending on and what they should be doing. If if you're mostly remote and you're moving around, that's a different spend than if you're in one spot. It really is something. And again, I said it earlier, if somebody wants to come to me and kind of reach out to me afterwards and have us go through what they're spending on, I'll gladly reach out to all their vendors and see what the difference is. But each one of them are very, very different. And, the other part is sometimes when we speak with, and as a whole, not just Solaris, but as a whole, the IT providers and the MSP providers, the managed service providers that are out there, we all kind of go to the executive director or the assistant executive director and make recommendations, or we talk about what should happen. And then they go to the board, and the board either approves it or disapproves it. What we try to do here is we try to go with them to the board meetings to say what all of it is, and if there's questions, because it's a little bit different than a business, where in a business the CEO would make the decision and kind of moves on. Sometimes in the nonprofit world, you'll sit with an executive director or an assistant, you'll tell them what's happening there, and then they go and present it to the board, and the questions that should be asked or answered are not being asked or answered. So it falls a little short. They save a little bit of money, but in the long run, if you've got a list of 10 things that need to be accomplished in your organization, if you do things slightly differently, maybe you'll check off more things off that list. So really, it's getting engaged, the board to buy in as well. And I think that as an IT as a whole, the companies need to do a better job making sure that the board understands that the mission will be easier accomplished if they had the tools and the wherewithal and the protection to make sure it's done a certain way.
We had a couple of questions coming in. So when we look at things like archiving and retaining historical data,
Yep.
is there a kind of a set amount of data that should be stored? Where should that data be stored?
Again, I don't know the cloud is always the strongest to me. I mean, that I'm going to say that over and over again. I can't say that enough. No matter what you're storing, the cloud will be the most protected. How much you're storing, how far back you go, it depends what you're doing. Are you medical? Are you dealing with HIPAA? Are you dealing with all that stuff? And you would probably know better than I would as an accountant. How long you should hold on to certain things and so on and so forth. I'm making sure there's room for it. Your accountant in that team is telling you how long you should hold it. But safety-wise, nothing will beat the cloud right now.
Okay. And again, as you said, there's really no difference in how long you should hold something, whether it's electronic or paper.
Right.
And again, this goes back also to I'm sorry, what?
It's just making sure you protect it, whether it's paper or, it's got to be protected.
And this also goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where organizations are starting to kind of look at where they are from a physical presence perspective and a technology perspective, and this kind of goes hand in hand with that in terms of taking the time and energy to maybe scan stuff or get things up electronically, so that the storage space is a lot smaller and you don't really need the facility.
Exactly. I have a question for you then. Let's reverse that. Since COVID and everything started changing, working remotely, the sharing of data, I'm containing, but as far as paperwork and finances and bill paying and things of that nature, what are you seeing? Like, what are you seeing as far as, are they switching apps? Are they doing something different? Or is the nonprofit world last to market on certain things? What are you
I think we're seeing that, there's a lot of efficiencies that can be created in the world of technology. I mean, we're seeing a lot of implementation of back office software, things like Expensify, Build Up Pay, all of those things. So, we are seeing more and more organizations, because of the remote atmosphere that, they're working in, are looking at some of those types of things. We're seeing kind of a move towards some of these board portals. There's like a Bell's board or something like that, where they're moving to find ways to maybe communicate more effectively between board members. So that's, again, another thing that I think we're seeing that's kind of big. I think really what it comes down to is organizations are, I think they're looking more at what their internal organizational needs are. I think they're spending more money on technology, and I think they kind of have to, because of the safety protocols that we've talked about a little bit about, the need to ensure efficiencies. They need to be, as you've said many times, they need to be more flexible and nimble, because of you never know when someone's going to necessarily go out with with COVID or another issue, and someone has to kind of step in and fill in. When everybody's in one place, all the information's in one place. when people are working remotely, you got to make sure that that also is the case, where it's not just one person who has access, but whoever needs to have access has access to information. So I think that's kind of out there too.
The other thing I'm
As you,
touching,
go
you
ahead.
want to make sure that the right people have access to it, and you have to
Yeah.
compartmentalize it, because just because it's there and it's nimble and it's there, getting back to active track, and I keep talking about that, you can make sure just the HR team knows who's getting paid what, just the accountants know the data, like you can really make sure. That's important as well. Like, you have to pay attention to how you're letting people work remotely, and not just being safe and secure. What do they have access to? You hit on a bunch of stuff just now that, you go across that, and if somebody internally finds out that somebody else is making something, or what's happening internally, and or it just, you want to make sure that it'd be the same look and feel as if they're sitting at their desk at the nonprofit headquarters than they are sitting in their living room, right?
Mhm.
I think that's a really good point you brought out. I think people have to pay attention to that.
And I think it also goes back also when, you are dealing with, people who are working off their own machines and everything, you want to make sure people have limited access if they don't need access to stuff, so that, again, even though you're setting up the VPN and you've got this trench and you've got protection on both ends, again, if a patch hasn't been updated or something like that, you want to make sure then if people don't have or shouldn't have access to something, you're not giving them access, which then opens that access up to other people too.
And there's a psychological side to this as well. You're sitting in your living room, you're in shorts, you're in a t-shirt, nobody sees what you're doing. There's a very lackadaisical feel to you. If you're sitting in your office and you're in a button down and you're wearing your shoes and you're in your office, you behave a certain way. We've seen it from the beginning of COVID. Everybody's wearing shirt and ties and still started a certain way, to the end where you walk into some of these Zoom meetings and it just, it's a free for all. Like, we've just all become very comfortable knowing that we're working from home. And that's also goes right along with your computer and your internet and what you're doing. Like, let me take 10 minutes and jump on this. Or your son or daughter is 5 years old and says, I need to do this class, this Google Classroom thing. And you do it. That's never happening in your office sitting in Hopog or wherever. That's not the case. That's only happening because you're in your living room.
Yeah, I was going to say, to put it in perspective, 5 minutes before this meeting started, I was wearing a hoodie.
Exactly. So, I'm wearing a button down for the first time in I don't know how long today. So yeah, it's exactly my point.
Yeah. Now, somebody also asked a question in terms of, and I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer it. But when you're dealing with storing organizational management, policy documents, important key information like payroll information, all of that type of stuff that could be really, really confidential, is that okay to, or would you advise storing that stuff in the cloud?
Yes. 100% yes.
Yeah, because what you said before is, the cloud is even more secure than a lot of the other vehicles that are out there.
Absolutely, 100% yes.
Another question: what are your thoughts about having an evaluation, assessment, audit of an IT vendor by an independent entity to ensure we are meeting our responsibility, ensuring compliance and best practices? Many organizations utilize an MSP because they don't have the internal expertise. How do we really know that MSP is doing what they should be doing for the client?
Well, the first thing you do is like anything else. You ask for referrals. You want to talk to their team. You want to see how long they've been in business. You want to talk to the engineers. Okay, so if you and I want to start a team today, an IT team, there's no barrier to entry. But I can't cut your hair without a license. So to me, what you want to do is you want to talk to some of their clients. You want to see how long they've been in business. You want to talk about what their plan is. You want to ask real in-depth questions about, how you're going to grow. What is your policy if something does happen? If something internally does happen.
Accessibility. You also want to know accessibility. How often and what happens if something goes on over the weekend or at night?
Who's your FINRA clients? Who are your HIPAA clients? Because if you have FINRA and HIPAA clients, you've got to be compliant to that level. Then you're dealing with an outside agency that's looking at your stuff as well. So do you go ahead and have, financial clients? Do you have, eye doctors and dentists and doctors and things of that nature? You want to see those types of things and ask, and then really get a good feel for what that MSP stands for and what they're working on. But absolutely, you should go ahead and have an outside audit done. I've done audits where we've put an agent, for lack of a better word, onto systems where we're testing to see what's going on internally, to see if their patches are done, to see if all the stuff that's, it expired in 2018 in July and they haven't done anything, but they have an IT team. So we do this. And I've had to put something on systems where the internal IT team didn't even know I put it on because I'm talking to the owner or the executive director, and they didn't see something that was put on living in their system, which to me is the first thing. It's a problem. Now, you can tell the internal IT team you're doing this for for an audit purpose for insurance. So you let your IT team know that you're doing this, and you don't want to scare them that they're being replaced and things of that nature. But realistically, you can do this in a way where, for insurance purposes, you want to make sure that you're compliant with whatever your guidelines are. So yes, you can absolutely do those, and you should do those probably more often than most people are.
Yeah, the other thing, and you mentioned with, using an outsourced IT solution, it could also be, everybody's going to have their own ideas and solutions to meet your needs. And it's kind of looking at those different solutions and determining which one is, in essence, the best fit for what your organization does, how your organization is moving forward, and everything else.
And also a tell is this. If the IT team, anything that you have, whether you should be the controller and the IT team should be the guest, you should have all of your passwords. If you're working with my team, you have all the passwords. I'm not holding on to any of that stuff. I have it, but it's yours. You don't have to, I'm not holding anybody ransom. I'm not trying to, you're the provider. You're the one that's paying the bills. You're the one, but I call up if there's a problem with your CRM system. I'm calling Verizon. I'm calling Optum. I'm calling the copier company. Like, my team's doing that. From any issue at all, your phones go down. You're not dealing with anything other than just making a phone call to my team and they answer live. With that said, what's their response time typically? Talk to some of their other, what happens if my internet goes down? What is your typical response time? Ask them those types of questions. But realistically, it's something that you have to pay attention to. And what I do internally here, or what I say our team does, is we build a book on you and I give it back to them. So they have a book. So if Ken, you're the pain and you're saying my computer's not great, you're just a pain. But really, Steve is the one who's got the older computer, the one that's there. We'll let them know that, you're paying X per person. We don't do a break fix model, which is if something breaks, we come in and pay, you pay for it and we fix it. I charge per person. So, there's a cost certainty every month what you're paying. So if my engineers come in, there's no extra charge there. What I also do is I give you a 3-year outlook. And that's the same thing I said before. Every 3 years, you should revisit this. And that's why that number is the same. Is I tell you that your firewall has an expiration on its warranty of March of 2022. So that's coming up. Here's all the computer's expiration date, your Microsoft, all that good stuff. And I give that to my clients. They have that. There's no like trying to figure it out or whatever. And then I also build a book on what each computer should look like, whether it be the CEO, CFO, or there's a group. And if something happens, I could rebuild it very quickly. So your team is your team. And I think that's something you should be looking for your MSPs as well.
Okay, that kind of brings up two questions, what you just answered. So first of all, we were talking about access before and providing access. Is that something that you look at and the typical MSP should look at too, in terms of what sort of access protocols you have for each different software or different software applications, and whether those are being assigned correctly, or is that something that's beyond?
100%. It's not even just who's getting it, it's where it sits physically on their screen. I want to have uniformity so you know exactly what you're supposed to do. That's really the way that this has to be looked at. There's a reason you build a structure and you want things a certain way. I know the top right because if I'm giving instructions to another person on a team remotely and I'm telling them, listen, the icon you're looking for is the second one from the top right. Think about that. You're not sitting in the same room anymore. We've been doing this for years, but even more so now, if I'm training somebody, if I'm working with somebody, I'm showing them how to do something, icons have to sit in a certain spot, how you open it, all that stuff should be exactly the same. So yes, you're 100% right, and who has access to it? There's no reason for, marketing to have access to accounting. And that's whether you're nonprofit or for-profit. It just makes sense.
And then the second thing that came out of the question you asked, you had, or answered, you had said that you go through and you let people know what the life cycles of the different software or different hardware and stuff that they have. What is your feel about organizations creating capital budgets or technology budgets so that they can plan out what their needs are going to be, and making sure that, especially in the nonprofit world where a lot of nonprofits are working off government grants and
Yep.
Their funding is kind of limited from a year-to-year basis.
Yep.
What do you what's your thought about kind of smoothing the aspects of technology spending?
So you hit a lot of things on the head, but to me, my job is to make sure they know in ample time that this is coming up and what are the solutions, right, that you may have. So here's an example. Your firewalls, or if you assume your servers are getting older and the warranty is going to expire in the beginning of next year. Is that your entry point to get into the cloud? Right? Does that now start changing things? What's included in the cloud package? Your Microsoft package, like your malware, your all of that good stuff is there. So you have to start looking at it where I'm giving you a 3-year outlook. So you can go to the board and say, here's what we're going to need budget-wise if we grow the way we think we're going to grow. The more roadway you have, or the more runway you have, the more liftoff you have, the more conversations you can have, the more, fundraising or talking to your constituents or donations or even buying certain things. There are certain ways to buy equipment for nonprofits that some people I walk into, they don't use access to that. There are certain vendors that I could work with, or MSPs those are other things. There's cost savings. You don't just go ahead and pick up a laptop. There may be other ways to do this. So that's the type of stuff that there's maybe cost savings in running it through an MSP that has the relationships, or even you don't know certain spots to go to. I know I kind of jumped around there that you were asking about, the cost, but the more runway you have, the more liftoff you'll have, the more decisions you could make. And truthfully, if things are starting to expire and you can see, okay, this expires in November, this expires in March, if I can couple those two expenses together, and instead of paying $4,000 for both things, I could pay, $3,000 and have a one-time solution. That may be a way to look at this. So I'm trying to give them as much outlook as I possibly can whenever I sit with them.
Okay. And again, I agree. I think that's extremely important. I think it's important for organizations to understand the life cycle of what they have and what they're using, especially since, once you get towards the tail end of the life cycle of a piece of equipment, it tends to break down more, you tend to have more problems with it, and you create inefficiencies in terms of, inefficiencies within the staff members who are using that equipment.
Got it. There was something, I don't know, I want to make sure we have time. There was something that was close to my heart that I wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on.
Yeah, we have a few minutes.
Oh yeah, and I know there may be questions, but I wanted to get to this. I know a lot of people have group homes, and there's group homes out there, and we've had some issues with COVID and how things are run. And the idea of bringing people in or taking people out or going to the events or things that they used to aren't there anymore. And a simple thing there that we've been doing with a lot of is the Wi-Fi check. And if you look at it this way, 2 years ago, there was a staff member that had a laptop that worked on the Wi-Fi and everything's fine and everything's great and everything's there. You've got 5, 10, 12 people living in a group home. Now they've all got a Chromebook, a laptop, an iPad, or whatever it may be. And the Wi-Fi isn't strong enough. And this is these people's, your clients, right, for lack of a better word. This is their people's outlet to the outside world, to their family, to friends, to communication is these devices. These families or even the nonprofits have provided these. And I'm doing more upgrades and it doesn't have to be really expensive at times, just to make sure the Wi-Fi workings in group homes gives these people an outlet and an avenue to speak to family members more easily. There's nothing more frustrating than a bad Wi-Fi connection, or things are choppy, or you get thrown off and so on and so forth. Nothing's worse than that. And it always happens.
I'm laughing because you've probably chopped out about 7 times during this.
I apologize for that.
No, it's okay.
So
I understand exactly where you're coming from.
So yeah, so anybody who's watching knows exactly what I'm talking about. But now imagine you're living in a group home and that's your only way out, right? Like this is it. So I think if anybody has group homes on here and they're looking at this, they have to go ahead and see if there's complaints coming from that. And that's the reason why. You may just think there's people are complaining or it's this. You're putting a massive drain on what your system used to be from 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, before COVID. Now there's 12 people trying to pull from the same thing. So same.
And again, it's not just group homes. It's kind of anywhere where you've got people, even some of the day hab facilities where, and it's not just necessarily the COVID area, but, even once we get past COVID and everything else, I think, the technology today and the software people are using today is using just so much more, bandwidth than it did in the past.
And you don't think about it. It's really something. And my heart goes out to people that are stuck in that house right now and can't go to their typical meetings. And I mean, you're it's their outlet. So to me, I think that's one of the things I really wanted to make sure I touched on, because it may not be something executive director or even the staff is thinking about. They just think that they're miserable because they're not going somewhere. Their routines changed. This may be something where it's not that big in the budget, but you can make a fix here.
Okay, awesome. What are some of the key takeaways that you think people should kind of glean from today's discussion?
Really knowing, you put it best with, cost. You have to know what you're looking at in a couple of years out. I think people froze for most of last year. I mean, we don't know if we're going back. It's 2 more weeks, flatten the curve. I mean, all these different things that we heard, we didn't know what was going to happen. And I think in the last 2 months now, people are starting to make real plans, giving up real estate, changing, starting to hotel their staff. Things of that nature are really, is planning out and now putting a plan in place. And that comes to cost, what you're going to do moving to cloud. But really cybersecurity is probably the thing that most people have to look at, because again, whether you're working from home or you're working from the office, there are people right now that are using this as an opportunity to go ahead and read your data and find a way in. And it may not be even just to affect you. It may be the fact that you are a conduit to other people. Like you're a conduit now, they're using you as a way to get to all of your donors, your vendors, people that are providing for you, and they're using you as a way out. So I just think that it's really something you should double check and make sure your staff are doing things the right way and setting up properly. And that's probably the biggest takeaway from me.
Awesome. Look, Michael, I really appreciate you sharing your expertise today. If someone wanted to get in contact with you, how would they go about doing that?
It's like my number is 212-606-2202, or it's michael@solarustech.com.
And you want to spell Solaris Tech out for everybody?
So it's SOLARUSTECH.com.
All right, Michael, this has been awesome. This is great. I think you shared a lot of really good insight and ideas to the group. So I really appreciate that.
I appreciate it.
Everybody. Thanks. Everybody, tune in March 16th. We'll be speaking with Michael Katakis from the Spirit of Huntington and Linda Berman from Corporate Source. They're going to be talking about social enterprise and they've kind of built certain businesses within the nonprofit sector, and it's kind of that blurring the lines between the nonprofit and for-profit areas. So I think that's important. Also, don't forget, for anybody in New York City, the New York City Imagine Awards are now live. You can go to NewYorkCityImagineAwards.com to download an application. Everybody, please stay safe, and we'll see you next month. Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.